Welcome to Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, something to talk about. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you again our garden guru, author, columnist, well-renowned person that knows plants very well. So welcome, Ann Lovejoy. We love you.
Oh, thanks, Karen. We just started talking about watering, and I think after the heat dome, one of the things I've had a lot of questions about is what do I do with my plants that got struggled or suffered after all that heat? And that is a great question because it's really quite possible that we'll have another, in fact, it's more than likely that we'll have other experiences like that in the future. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about is building soil resilience. And it's going to sound a lot like what I always say, because the things that I usually talk about in terms of healing soil are actually the kinds of things that help make soil more resilient. So a lot of it starts with, it's moisture and mulch are the key ingredients. Keeping soil evenly moist, not sodden, because roots need air as much as they need water, but making sure that you water deeply, not just often, is really helpful. And one of the ways, of course, to tell is the magic finger test. Like if you think you've watered really well, scratch down with your finger and see if you just have a little wet layer and then a dry underneath. And often you'll find that it is really pretty dry underneath, and that top inch or two of soil is actually taking all the water and it's not getting very much further. One thing that often happens too is soil will crust over in dry periods and hot dry periods. And so it's sometimes useful to water and then stop, just like wet everything down and stop and give it time to kind of integrate, and then go back and water some more and stop and let it get absorbed, and do that repeated a few times. This is really true with pots. You might think you've watered and watered, and if you try to heft it, you realize it doesn't weigh anything. That means it's really not taking it in. And with pots, one of the best things you can do is put them in a deep saucer and then begin to water, not just from the top, but also from the bottom. And that will integrate water through the whole pot and make sure those roots are getting, because you don't want the roots to come up to the top and be shallow. You want them way down in the middle of the soil. And that will really help. And of course, in a garden setting, you can't really do that. But one of the best ways to make sure your plants are getting through okay is during this cool period, go ahead and water, even though you might think you don't need to, and do that soil check. Like make sure that you're checking down a few inches deep, and it should be moist, like for 4 or 5 inches, not sodden, but moist. And after you feel like it's really well moistened, then you want to put some mulch on, and it can be compost. It can be compost topped with wood chips. It can be a combination of shredded fine bark, and I don't use bark usually, but that shredded fine bark mixed with compost or mixed with bigger wood chips can be a good mixture. That's not too expensive. But the point is, when you cover the garden soil, you want to make sure whatever you're putting on top is moist as well, or it will simply suck the moisture you put in there right back out, right? That mulch needs to be wetted thoroughly as well. But you'll find that when heat comes, and I put down several inches of shredded tree material, usually, not bark again, but tree wood chips, arborist chips. And you can get those a lot of places, like from the Tribe and 305, which is Port Madison Enterprises, or from Tills, or lots of different places. And they usually have a pretty wide range of chips. In a border setting where you've got big beds and borders or shade garden, you can use the coarsest ones. They're called hog fuel, and they're fine for restoring soil nutrients and long-term healing of the soil. But in a smaller garden or in a pot, you're probably going to want to go with something a little finer, because otherwise you'll have big lumps and jumps of branches and stuff sticking out of your little pot. Doesn't work so well. But the point is that you're creating a kind of a cover for your soil that really helps it retain moisture and resist evaporation. That's huge. And as for the plant recovery, if the usual thing, we come out and we see that the plants are all flopping after a hot day. If you water in the evening, in the cool of the evening, just water the soil and the roots, don't water the foliage. And if the foliage perks back up, the plant is just fine. If the next day it's still kind of droopy, but better, you can water. If it's the next day, it's early in the day, and it's supposed to be a warm day, you can actually water the foliage, which we don't usually do. But in the morning, it's going to be it's going to evaporate off as the day warms up. But by watering the foliage and the roots, you give that plant several ways to hydrate. And a lot of times you'll find they slowly come back. Eventually you may discover that's part of that plant is just not going to come back, but part of it's doing okay. Often there'll be new shoots by now, because that was a couple weeks ago. And if you see that, I'd give them a little time to grow up. And if the old leaves look funky or start to be brown, but there's still a lot of green, you can trim off the brown. But remember that when plants die like that, they're actually sending the nutrients back to the stem and back down the stem and back into the roots. And even when they're brown and funky, they're still full of nutrients, which is why it's really better to like shred your leaves and put them back than like take them all away. But if you can't handle it, you can take it off and put it in your compost and put a little more compost down on your plant. And then slowly as those new shoots grow up, they will you will be able to remove the rest of the dead and dying foliage. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. But the one thing you never want to do is fertilize a damaged plant. It's always like we think we want to feed them up, but actually that puts a lot of stress on a plant. And especially after a heat experience, sometimes they lose surface roots and smaller roots as well. And putting on fertilizers, asking them to grow to take on all this nutrient that they can't actually transport and work with. So it's really kind of counterproductive. You wait at least a month for the plant to recover and then use a diluted half-strength fertilizer if you feel that you must, but probably just maintaining consistent moisture and using a compost and chips and things to create a nice moisture barrier that helps the moisture stay in the soil will do more for the plant than trying to force it into new growth.
So Ann, in my pot, which in my potting soil from Bainbridge Gardens, for my tomato, the infamous tomato of Sheila Kerwin, I just put on Miracle-Gro combination as I've had before, and oh, Megan, that's a cute cat.
It is.
That a couple of days ago, so I should not be doing that, right?
Oh, it's fine if your plant wasn't harmed. If the plant came through the heat just fine, and most tomatoes don't mind the heat at all. The only thing with the tomatoes is when the temperatures get over 80, they tend to drop their flowers or their flowers become sterile. It's weird because, you know, they come from the tropics, but even in the tropics, there are moderate areas and baking hot areas. And tomatoes are not actually usually growing wild in the full sun in their native habitats. But here they need to get the warmth and sun that, you know, to grow the way they need to and ripen their fruit. But if your plant didn't show distress, yeah, it's fine. You can go on feeding it every month as you would. That's fine. And in a pot, using something like Miracle-Gro is fine because, again, it's in a tiny artificial environment. It doesn't have the resources the plants would in the soil. So yeah, it's relying on you, Sheila. It's all on you, right? They're like little orphans of the soil, and we have to protect them and feed them and care for them.
It's a happy plant. It's putting out little babies.
Yeah. And a lot of people said, why were the tomatoes so late this year? And if you think about it, we had a very cool, strange spring with off again, on again, off again, on again. And that's hard for a lot of plants. We then had that heat dome, which again caused a lot of the flowers to abort. And now they're just beginning again. And so I think we're going to see, actually, my plants are putting on good flushes of tiny fruit as well, now that they've kind of gotten over the first fruit that was starting to ripen before is actually ripening pretty nicely.
Tomatoes are kind of iffy around here.
They are. Last year wasn't the best year in the world either. The year before that was actually pretty good. So much depends on consistent weather, which is not a specialty of our region, especially here in the Maritimes, where, of course, we get those marine layer mornings, which I love, don't get me wrong, but plants don't always love those, especially the tropicals, the tomatoes, the beans, the squash, the peppers, the eggplants. They're not really happy about the cool gray morning thing.
But the kale likes it.
Kale loves it. The greens love it. And that's wonderful. And also peas. I'm still getting peas, which at this time of year, usually my peas have all died of PE nation and gone to heaven. But even despite that heat, of course, it helps that my peas are not growing exposed in big rows. Like they're all mixed in with everything else, including kale. And they're sheltering in amongst a mixture of flowering plants and things so that they're not hung out to dry. And they're still producing very well. But my beans were so late because it was so cold that they're really only now looking happy and starting to really bloom. Mine climb up sunflowers. And they use sunflowers as bean poles. And that's kind of fun. They look really great. My grandkids were helping me. When the beans come up their cage, they start to wander, and they helped me find the long strands and wrap them around a nearby sunflower. So now they can make that climb.
Oh,
yeah.
That is awesome.
Well, now that the goldfinches are coming to the sunflowers too, as the first flowers are fading and they're starting to set seed, the finches like to pull those seeds right out of the seed head up at its 10-foot pole.
So do you have some good guinea pigs that are going to be happy?
Guinea pigs?
Yeah, with the sunflower seeds.
Well, I usually actually, when the sunflowers go off, I leave them standing there until the beans are done because they're bean poles and that's their job. But when I take them down, if there's still a lot of seeds, I usually hang them upside down somewhere so the birds can come, like on a fence or, on the balcony or off my porch. I tie them up upside down and hang them, and they'll dry out that way. And instead of putting them on the ground where it can go attract rats or other little mammals, if you hang them, they're going to be taken mostly by birds.
Right. Do you ever eat any of them, Ann?
Not very often. They're, oh, hi, Laura. They're kind of a pain to hull, sunflower seeds are. But yes, if you are doing something tedious and you're just sitting there, hulling sunflower seeds is probably excellent dietary measure because it takes you so long to get the dang things out. But your calorie per hour is probably pretty low.
Laura, we're talking about tomato plants. How's your tomato plant on the porch?
It's incredible. I'm actually going to take you out there and show you.
Yay.
Oh my gosh, a field
Well,
trip.
it was starting to burn when I was there.
Well, yeah, there's, you can see some of that. Let's see. Here's some sort of burn stuff, but I'm going to just kind of back up so you can see it's like taking over the porch. Let's see. Of course, I can't see what I'm giving you.
It looks,
it's like almost as tall as I am.
yeah, it looks great.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, and there's, lots of little tomatoes coming, and I can't believe how big this thing is. And it's like one plant. I'm like, my God.
How big is your pot?
It's it's pretty big. It's you can see
Yeah.
and that here's my foot.
Pot.
Well, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Okay. It's probably 2 feet, or at least 2 of my feet.
So 2 cubic feet, roughly speaking, and that's pretty
Yeah.
good. Yeah, that's really quite good because I would sort of say half a yard or so, and a yard is 3 cubic feet, and so that you're probably giving it a really generous. Most of the nutrients for tomatoes are taken in by the root tips as they explore. So a bigger pot is definitely helpful for. So it's better to when you're growing them and you've got a little bitty one, it's better to put it in a medium sized pot and then pot it up to a bigger pot and a bigger pot, because when you put a small plant into a great big pot, it actually can struggle because it doesn't really that soil is often mixed and there are air pockets and things, and it doesn't really have a place to be in the right way. But if you grow it on for a few stages and take it from a gallon, you could put it into a pot like that. It'd be perfect.
Cool.
Yeah. We were just talking about that during that heat dome, anytime the temperature gets over about 80, a lot of times the flowers on tomatoes and peppers and beans and things will abort. And then tomatoes that tend to fall off. And so now we've got a whole new crop because we've had some time and new flowers are forming. Any fruit that had formed before that will stay on, but you notice a lag in the formation of new fruit after that heat dome event.
Yeah. Should I pour more salt water on it?
No, this one time.
Okay.
This one time. One baptism is enough.
Okay.
Just,
Yeah, no-
just wait, Laura, until you get that first tomato. It's so good.
Okay. No, I can't. We'll share, Sheila. No question.
With my grandkids, I just was saying, I took them into the pea patch, my little garden over at Eagle Harbor Church, and they love to help me water and tidy that up. But they were really taken with the nasturtiums, because they've learned that if you bite the little horn off the back of a nasturtium, it's full of nectar. So they really enjoy that.
Oh, like clover. Yeah,
Clover and
exactly.
with
Oh,
columbines too. Columbine horns are the same way. You can bite the little horn off the bottom of it. And they picked a lot of flowers for their salad, and they actually ate the whole thing, which is kind of amazing. So they picked nasturtium leaves and kale and lettuce, and then borage flowers and lavender flowers and calendula petals and rose petals.
Oh my.
Right. All that was in their beautiful salad. And
I
then
should be putting my rose petals in the salad.
yeah, if you, I have a little bowl of rose petals here. If
Oh my gosh.
you take them right at the point where they're shattering, so you gently pull them back and they all just poof off, right? You'll notice they're very fragrant and they're quite sweet. And they're fun to put in a salad or sprinkle on a cake or use as like living decoration, put them on some grilled fish, anything like that. They're a fun little garnish. But yeah, you can eat rose petals as long as they're organically raised and they don't have systemic toxins,
Right.
of course, in the plant. But I was so tickled to watch these little kids pile their plates full of flowers and chow down and have a wonderful, and they said, let's just use a little light oil, Granny. I don't think this needs a heavy dressing.
Oh, that is
well,
fantastic.
Live and
okay.
learn.
Oh my
I
God.
know.
You're not teaching them good.
That's right. Music to my ears, Ann.
Exactly. And one thing that's fun to do with these rose petals, if you don't want to eat all of them, but you can dry them just in a single layer, more or less, like on a baking sheet out of direct sun, and they'll dry, shrivel up, and you can use them for potpourri, or you can, I mix them with coconut oil, and then you can actually put them in a jar with a lid and steam them over like a double boiler for about an hour, and it will infuse the oil with the rose essence, and it's really good for your skin. Or you can do that with calendula petals too. And calendula petals are also really good for chickens, and it makes their yolks especially rich and yellowy orangey, which is kind of nice.
Ooh.
But yeah, I mean, I really love sort of using the whole plant in that way. They also picked a lot of lavender, and actually most of the lavender, like if you're picking lavender to harvest, you want to do it before, when it just starts to bloom and about maybe half the buds are open. And that's how to collect the flowers. And then those also can be dried in the same way, kind of in a single sheet out of direct sun until they're a little crisp almost. But by now, what you're going to be picking is the seeds instead. And so, and those, you want to wait till the whole thing is a bit gray, and then you just strip it backwards, like from the stem down. And then you can save
Raise it
those.
up a little bit, Ann.
Oh, sorry. So you save them.
There we go.
I just put them in a plate, and again, put them out in the, so you just pull backwards down the stem and you get this little cluster, and then you can open it out like that. And then it smells amazing. There's plenty of fragrance even in these seed pods. And then you can dry those and use them in potpourri as well, or even in salves and things like that. They have many of the same essential oils the flowers do.
Or
So it's
lemonade.
too late to do something.
Or lavender lemonade.
Oh yeah, lavender lemonade is great. Or I put them in sugar, put them in a little jar with some sugar and let them infuse for a while, a few weeks or even a month or two. And then you sift them out because you don't want the lump in it. But that's nice in a muffin or in your tea or whatever, right?
Right.
I
Okay.
might ask a little bit about carrots. I know we've been cooking with some carrot tops, and we're getting some really funny looking carrots coming out now and then.
Now, here's the thing about carrots. You're lucky if you've got carrot tops, because what most of us have now is rabbits. Because the coyote population got the parvovirus from dogs a few years ago, the coyote population is way down this year. And that means that rabbits are appearing all over the island. Not just, for many years, we mostly had the rabbits that were released up in Battle Point and places like that. So you'd get these big white ones or black ones, or, they were obviously domesticated rabbits and their offspring. And I can remember gosh, like 20 years ago, walking through Battle Point and seeing 30, 40 rabbits in just a few minutes walk. Well, those rabbits got wiped out when the coyotes really moved in. But now what we're seeing are small rabbits that are kind of grayish and brown, and they look like the pygmy rabbits of the east side, which I'm not sure they can be that, but I think they're more some kind of a native rabbits. They look like the little rabbits we see on the Gulf Islands. Like I see them on Whidbey, and I've seen them on San Juan's. So these little bunnies are very cute. And one of them lives in the heart of my pea patch at Eagle Harbor Church. I know. But everybody says they eat all the carrot tops, except they usually leave one so that your carrot can make it through to life. But yeah, not everybody knows that you can eat carrot tops, but if you beat the bunnies, you actually can. And the reason your carrots might be oddly shaped is because usually our soil is pretty full of stones. And so if you want to do straight carrots, you can do them in a large pot, like a 3 to 5 gallon pot, or you can do them in a bed with sifted soil. And when you sift the soil, of course, you're destroying all the soil communities. So if you do that, then you only have to do it one time, and then you can start feeding it and putting compost on top and so forth. And after a couple of years, the balance will be back. But you can grow carrots in that soil, and they will usually be straight and true. The pots are nice because you can cover them with like muslin or a small, that fine plastic mesh screening. And that can help keep out some of the things, the carrot pests that can make holes in the tops of your carrots and drill all the way down into them. But for the deformedness almost always comes from bumping into other things underground. Roots, rocks, pieces
So
of
you can just live with that too, right?
Yeah, I had this wonderful pair that were twined like lover carrots. Grandkids thought that was really fun looking, and I thought it was too. So yeah, strange things can happen in the dark.
We had some potatoes that just showed up from last year, and they started to grow. And so we weren't ready for them. But what we did, I don't know if this will work, but we put a cardboard box around it, and we've been putting straw and stuff as the carrots have grown up. So we're kind of making a garbage bag box over the top of so in hopes that we'll get several layers of potatoes in there. I don't know whether it will work.
It might well, because there's a traditional way to do that with a garbage can, where you cut the bottom out and you cut holes along the side, and as the potato vines start to grow, or not true vines, but the long leggy stems, you keep heaping on, as you did, straw and or soil or compost mixture, and then they'll go up and up and up and start poking their leaves out the holes, and then at the end you can sort of tip the whole thing over, and most of the potatoes will be in there, and usually much freer of scab. Our acidic soils tend to make potatoes a little scabby. It doesn't mean you can't eat them, it just means they're not magazine ready. Martha would
They go very well with the carrots then.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing, where if you ever grow potatoes, you will always have potatoes, because you can't help but miss some of the teeniest ones, and they winter over. This little pea patch of mine at Eagle Harbor is full of potatoes and borage and lovage and parsley and all kinds of things that used to live there. And I've let a lot of them grow, and I just saw some were sort of starting to peek out of the soil along the edge. So my grandkids and I harvested, and we got almost like over 12 pounds just from a couple plants at the very edge of the bed. So I'm sure there's easily 100 pounds in that bed. And usually you don't want to harvest until it stops, begins to flower. The flowers start to look, they get fertilized. And then the leaves will often sort of turn yellow and start to flop over, and let them dry off. At that point, you don't want to water them anymore. And then you can either leave them in the ground for a while or dig them when you're ready. But yeah, once you have potatoes, it's a gift. And actually potatoes, nutritionally speaking, potatoes and beans are the most nutritionally dense crops you can grow if you're in a small space and you're trying to grow some of your own food for food resilience. It's a great crop. The one thing to be thinking about, though, if you do harvest some potatoes early, as we did, they're too young to cure. I had to take these because, like I said, they were in the public path, so they had to come out. But they're not old enough to really dry off and become storage potatoes. So you have to eat them fairly fast because they're not keepers at all. So we had a lot of potato salad and potato pancakes and this and that, roasted potatoes, all kinds, and they're great. And then they started to get a little saggy and we had to compost the rest of them. So I'm sure they'll reappear.
Thinking about lavender now,
Okay.
back to lavender.
Sure.
I always keep a little bowl next to the door. And when I go to answer the door, I squish, and that gives the fragrance of lavender for your house.
Yes, it does.
That is something just to be shared.
Well, when I have an odd sock, which seems to happen fairly often, I often fill it with lavender, dried lavender seed pods at the end of the season, and then put it in your sock drawer, and all your socks will smell like lavender, which is kind of nice too.
And for years, Anne, we always put them into our cedar chest.
Yes.
And everything else, this is in the Midwest and in Montana, to keep the moths and everything else out.
Mhm.
Oh, so it's wonderful for sweaters and your woolens and things like that.
It's true. And boy, this is an area of the country where we do have moths, that
Oh.
clothing moths are not uncommon at all.
Well, don't we have silverfish here also?
We do.
Yeah, and that is a good for that too. So
Yeah.
anyhow, I'm getting off.
Oh, no, I'm intrigued though. So lavender for my sweaters. Okay.
Yes. Yes. And you can,
I bet cedar too, but
great. Both of those are actually pretty effective. There are a lot of different herbal remedies for chasing away, moths and things, protecting woolens and natural fibers. Most of them aren't scientifically backed, but cedar and lavender actually are. There have been genuine studies that say that they actually do repel quite a lot of different kinds of pests. So, but you can make little sachets, again, using muslin bags. They're little muslin drawstring bags you can buy for tea quite inexpensively. And they work great for things like lavender sachets. If you're not a handy sewer person, I'm not very good at sewing. But, easy to fill with scented herbs and some wood shavings. Because actually, cedar shavings all over your clothing is not that great because they cling. It's hard to get them off a sweater. Ask me how I know this.
The lavender sugar, would that go into a hummingbird feeder okay, or should I keep that out of the hummingbird feeder?
No. In hummingbird feeders, you only want to use cane sugar. For some reason, beet sugar is not as good for them, but cane sugar is best. And you just use that very simple formula, 1 cup of sugar and 4 cups of water. It doesn't have to boil. You can use hot tap water and just dissolve the sugar in it, let it stand till it's cool enough to put into your feeder. And you can refrigerate extra. I usually don't fill the feeders in the summer when it's hotter weather because it can get spoiled very fast. So I'll just put out enough to get them through a day. And actually in summer, some bird people say you shouldn't put out the hummingbird feeders so much, but things like fuchsia baskets. But I think for a lot of us in smaller places or apartments, it's perfectly okay to have a hummingbird feeder up, but probably put it in a little bit of a shaded place where it's protected from the hot afternoon sun. And do check it pretty often. You can just rinse it out and with vinegar and water and rinse it really, really well to make sure it's not carrying anything nasty. Because hot weather definitely can cause sugars to ferment. Sorry?
And you don't think the lavender would be a good idea?
No,
The
I
lavender
really don't.
sugar? That wouldn't be good.
No, because it's not nectar or anything natural like that. I mean, it's fun for us. It smells great, but I don't think for hummingbirds, it's apparently it's quite important that we not adulterate the sugar water with anything else. So I just try to keep it super plain and super simple. And like I said, you can refrigerate the extra. I do have 2, because in winter I like to put one out and then bring it in the morning when it's frozen and put a fresh one out and let the cold one thaw out, because they really rely on them and they need to feed very often in winter, as much as every 15 minutes. So we're actually keeping a lot of those overwintering Annas alive.
You know what they love nasturtiums.
They do.
We have a lot of nasturtiums and they just love them. So.
I've seen them feeding off the lavender too. I have a lot of hummingbirds in the yard and they like all kinds of things. They'll come down and battle the bees for the catmint and oregano and things like that too. It's funny when I rinse off those beds because they're right by the road and they get dusty, my big pollinator patch, this cloud rises up and there's so many kinds of pollinators. You know, there's honeybees and there's native bumblebees and there's native solitary bees and there's hoverflies and there's all kinds of critters that are using the nectar from those very nectariferous flowers. Having a pollinator patch is so much fun because you can really, the kids, the grandkids love to look and they say, look, Granny, this one has a black bottom and a yellow head. And we'll go look it up and it's a black bottom bumblebee. Oh, no.
There's so many different types.
Washington state has about 400 species of bees. So it's fun to we don't learn them all, of course, and they're not all indigenous to this area, but we have quite a few. It's fun.
I love just walking by and just hearing the hum. That just gets my heart.
Yeah, it's like a full choir because they're all different pitches, right? I think I've talked about this before, that when honeybees go to visit a tomato plant, they vibrate, they sit outside, they perch just outside the flower and they vibrate at middle C. And that middle C is the magic pollinator key note for pollination. And the pollen starts shedding all by itself. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a pitchfork, you can get a tuning fork that's a middle C tuning fork, and it will, all the pollen will come down. I did want to talk a little about fall starts because, weird as it sounds, this is a good time to start planting new lettuce and another crop of peas. Of course, things like kale, and I love arugula and chicory. And this is really the next few weeks, or well, the next 6 weeks or so is really the best time to plant those. And there are so many amazing kinds now. There's a really interesting group in outside of Portland that's a culinary, what do they call themselves? Like the Culinary Arts Group. And it started because a lot of the chefs were saying to the people who are breeding plants, you always do field trials in the field and you're eating only raw vegetables, and that's fine, but we cook them and we serve them different ways. We need to know which ones taste best when they're broiled or when they're steamed or when they're this or that. So they started doing tasting feasts where chefs from all these different restaurants would come and prepare dishes that involved peppers or fancy kinds of cutting celery, for instance, is really a hot, trendy thing right now. It's like long, almost like white straw stalks with little tufts of celery, and you can chop the straws, or you can actually harvest the tops and use that as greens or put them in salads or stir fries, and then use the white straws in your cocktail. Very fancy. But because of this culinary experiment, there's all these really wonderful new kinds of chicories and arugulas appearing from all, mostly from Europe and Asia. And they are incredible fall crops. You can grill them, especially, they're incredibly yummy, or roast them to bring out this sort of caramelize them and sugary, because they're bitter. So they have this great contrast if you do something like that. And they're really nice with poultry, or I assume meats of various kinds. But yeah, it's a fun crop that hasn't been very popular here, and it's starting to be much more available. So that's one of my big ones. But of course, kale too. Many, many, many kinds of kale. And it's fun to have a variety, since that's a lot of times the freshest thing we can pick all winter long. And one thing to think about is when you're pulling out things you're harvesting, and you want to refresh the soil, again, water it deeply. This harvesting often will expose, root crops anyway, will expose how dry your soil really is. So you can wet it, replenish it with compost, put some mulch on, and when you put in the little new starts or seedlings, you want to be sure to provide a little bit of afternoon shade, either by planting behind something taller that won't be harvested quite yet, or by putting a little muslin screen up. And you want high shade. You don't want to put it right on top of them, because that can sort of create a little tent and cook them. But maybe take a couple sticks and either staple or wire the shade cloth to those supports. And then you can shade your little seedlings of things like baby peas or lettuces, greens that don't really like hot afternoon sun. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You can start sowing lettuce again too already. I like these variety packs where you can get a bunch of different kinds And you just do like a foot or 18 inches every week or so, depending on how much you use. And as that comes up, you harvest that. And then the next crop will be arriving, and you pull the outer, of course, the outer mature leaves first, or you can harvest the whole head and thin it that way. But doing it every week or 10 days gives you a steady supply. And around here, you can keep going as long as we don't get a big killing frost. Frost kind of bitters the lettuce because it changes the chemical composition and makes it kind of tough and inedible. But frost will also be wonderful for things like the arugula and chicory, and also for Brussels sprouts and even broccoli and things like that. And I like that broccoli, like this purple sprouting broccoli as a fall crop, not going for the big head, but a lot of small heads and the edible greens, because all those leaves on a broccoli are edible too. So those are another plant that will keep on giving for many, many months, sometimes clear to March, which is kind of fun.
Nice.
Yeah. But replenishing the soil is important because it's already given. And when we take away, we harvest, we remove what would be nutrients that would be going back into the soil as they rotted down. So we got to make sure that we do put back nutritive composts. And then again, covering with some kind of mulch to retain. It retains moisture in the summer, but it also protects the soil from crusting, because some of that crusting is from the pounding of hard rain or the wind, or even baking of the sun. And there's some temperature protection there too as well. So the soil, the top few inches of soil is where most of the life is, and you don't want to cook it, and you don't want to drown it, and you don't want it to blow away. So that, again, that's why a protective mulch, a feeding mulch, and then a protective mulch are good blanket layers for anything you're gonna, not just vegetables, that's also true in the ornamental borders as well.
Right.
I have something to ask about ornamentals, because my grandson, Joshua, the environmentalist, gave me for Christmas, and I asked about this earlier, and I did what I was told to do, what you told me to do, Ann. But he gave me black spider grass. He also gave me green spider grass, and he also gave me seeds. These are all seeds for barberry bushes. And I planted them all, and none of them came up.
Well, some seeds, different seeds have different needs, right? So the easiest seeds to sprout are weed seeds. They're called seeds of disturbance, and they like air and light, and they sprout really easily on the top of the soil. Most garden seeds need to be planted, but a lot of them might need a period of cold. It's called cold stratification, and that's why sometimes the package might even say store in the refrigerator for X amount of time, and then take them out and sow them, or sow in the fall in a covered pot and leave it over the winter. And a lot of times seeds of things like the barberry, that could take a while, and it might have a coating on it, because barberry berries that are eaten like that, you often have the seeds often have a protective coating so that it goes through the stomach tract of whatever ate it, a bird usually, or an animal or a person. And that stomach acids will take off some of that protective coating so that when it comes out in bird poop or whatever, it's ready, it's being planted by a bird with a little packet of nutrients, right?
Well, just to let you know that these seeds all came from the plants themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So when they're harvested, but the seeds of barberry, for instance, are encased in a berry, right? And so to get them, you either soak the berry, or you wait till the berry's already well rotted, and then you kind of crumble it and flush them out. And that means the protective coating is still on there. So sometimes if you put them outside and just leave them on your deck with a label in the pot, or I like to put blue painter's tape on the pot itself and write on that, because I find crows or wind or various things can carry off my markers pretty easily. But on a pot, that label will stay, and face it away from the sun so that it doesn't get bleached out and you can't read it anymore. But anyway, it might take 2 years. Some seeds will, I was growing something called Smyrnium perfoliatum, and you have to sow very fresh seed, and it will sprout, make a little sprout, and then it looks like it dies, but it actually goes back underground and makes a little storage root. And then the next year it comes up and makes a real plant, but you got to remember that. So things like that, it might take a couple years. It might need to go through the winter. Sometimes a period of intense heat, like the heat dome, will fool the plants into thinking it was winter because they just shut down and they don't really know whether it was a cold shutdown or a hot shutdown necessarily. If they go dormant, they might come back out of dormancy and be tricked into blooming like it's spring. You never, plants can do lots of different things. So I would be patient and give it a little more time. Also, sometimes they need to stay moist, or sometimes they need to dry out. It really depends a lot on their environment. The greens.
Did you
that are
say
black-
that I should put them on the top of the soil, the spider grass?
do you have more seeds than you sowed?
Oh, yeah.
I would say look it up online, and it's called Liriope.
I hope it's successful, Sheila.
So too.
Yeah,
Mostly because they come from Josh,
Right.
well, of
Of
course.
course you want to save them. So yeah, so looking up growing those from seed, that's what I often will do is from seed and see what it says. And the seed company will tell you usually like, even it says, even though Liriope seeds are commonly grown from vegetative cuttings, start them from seed about 8 weeks before the last frost date. Fill a bowl with warm water, add the seeds and soak them for 24 hours. Now this is interesting. Mix 1 part household bleach and 9 parts water. Now why, I do not know.
Ooh.
Soak the seed starting tray to sterilize it. Oh, that's what they're saying.
Oh, that tray.
Yeah. What I usually grow seeds in is, those plastic boxes with a lid that the lettuce comes in sometimes. I don't buy it that way myself, but I get it from other people. And just because they've got holes in it on the side, that actually helps. And the top can work like a little greenhouse cover, and you can grow them in there. But once the seeds have soaked, then you it says press the soil to level it and sprinkle, like put the seeds down and just sprinkle like maybe a 1/4 inch of soil over the top of it. So that is what they're suggesting. And then put the lid on loosely so that it retains moisture, but doesn't keep out oxygen exchange. Does that make sense? So that would be a good thing to try. That'd be a good science experiment for you, right? But it's funny because some seeds require a lot of different weird things. One of my friends and I were trying to grow years ago these plants that come from the fynbos of South Africa, and it turned out they would only germinate if they're exposed to the smoke from burning fynbos plants. And it turned out that because of that, you can buy powdered fynbos smoke, and to resuscitate it, you put it in the microwave in a little bowl with some water and the seeds, and you put them in the microwave for, I don't remember whether it was, there was a whole elaborate thing, but here we were microwaving our powdered smoke and our little seeds, and it worked. They germinated.
How exotic.
I know, but sometimes you really have to experiment. And some seeds you have to nick with a knife very carefully because the seed coating is so hard. So there's a big range of how nature protects its babies, right?
Yeah, that is fascinating.
Yeah, because you think, if you just grow the usual vegetables and things, it's really easy to think that they all are treated the same way, but they're really not. There's quite a range of needs that are optimal for the sprouting and germinating of seeds. And sometimes it's temperature dependent. So you might need to use a heat mat under things like tomatoes and peppers and so forth if you're growing them on in the spring and you're starting them in the house, and maybe your house isn't all that warm like mine. One of those heat mats that holds a temperature of about 70 degrees, you'll get much better germination than you would just on your windowsill, for instance.
Yes.
Well, I know he got these seeds off the plants that he had on his patio. So they came off of his own plants, which is sort of cool.
It is cool. It's great. My grandkids and I do a lot of seed saving. This is the one they thought was the most beautiful. And this is the seed pod of what's called Nigella, or love in a mist. And to me, it always looked like a little balloon with horns, kind of. I don't know if you can really see it.
Is that pretty?
Sorry, I have essential tremor, so my hands shake quite a bit. But yeah, they're beautiful. But this one's not ready. When it's ready, if you shook it, you'd hear the seeds bouncing around like, like salt in it or something, like little. Just like with these are poppy seeds, and you can see the little windows are open under the flaring top. Those
Mm.
little, yeah, that means they're ready. And if I pour them into my hand, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, so there they are.
Yeah, there they are. So, and they're black. And if you do this and the seeds that come out are brown or green, they're not really ready and they won't really germinate. And the thing about poppy seeds is they prefer cool weather. So they might germinate now because it has been cool weather. But typically in the summer, if you sprinkle poppy seeds, anything from California poppies to or Oriental poppies, they're probably not going to germinate and they'll probably go dormant and maybe they'll appear 2 or 3 years from now, just randomly and be like, where did you come from? But if you sow them in the fall, that's why fall sowing is recommended for Hearty Annuals. And on the seed package, often we'll have a little HA up in the corner that means Hearty Annual. And those are the things you want to sow in place, more or less, in like September, October, November, December, and then they'll be up and running early in the spring. And what I found is it's really easy to forget why they're there and to think that they are weeds and pull them all out. So it's a really good idea if you sow them in the ground to put a little 4-inch pot or something of soil right next to it with a few seeds in that. And again, put your tape on there and mark what it is and put it near where you sowed the seeds in the ground. And then when they start to come up, you'll say, oh no, wait, it looks like the ones in the little pot. So it must be okay. Again, how do you think I learned that?
So do you ever make poppy seed muffins or anything?
Oh yeah, you know, you can harvest an amazing amount of seed from these. They're very prolific, and yes, we make poppy seed muffins, or they like, you know, those sort of everything bagels. So we make bagels or toast with all kinds of seeds. We pick fennel seeds and dill seeds, and you can get, if you let cilantro go to seed, that's another yummy seed too, right? Lots of things like that, parsley seeds, and we put those on and they think it's just yummy. It's also fun in salads if you sprinkle like rose petals and poppy seed salad dressing. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I didn't get a chance to really talk about the trees, but I really wanted to share that I read this couple of really interesting articles recently, science reports, about how the power of even one tree in a heat dome like that can actually lower temperatures in a neighborhood several degrees, you know, not the whole neighborhood. But one of the studies showed that they went to neighborhoods not very far apart, a few blocks apart, and some had lots of trees and shrubs and some had virtually none. And of course, the neighborhoods with trees and shrubs had markedly lower temperatures, recovered evening temperatures faster. And guess which ones were wealthy communities and which ones were not? And you'd be right. So one of the cool things I started thinking about is going to places like the Arbor Day Foundation. Everybody knows that you can, or pretty much everybody knows, you can mail away and they'll send you 12 free seed tree saplings, and they're pretty little. But you can actually grow those on pretty well in pots and then work with kids or school kids or grandkids or whatever to plant them in suitable places. But they also have great programs like a K through 12 school program that you could connect your kids or grandkids school to. And they have like green city programs where you can work with your own city government to do more tree planting. But the power of even one tree in a neighborhood is so strong that I thought this might be a cool thing to do. Go around the island and look at neighborhoods that don't have much in the way of trees and help offer some new ones, or, you know, those big bare expanses of grass. Geez Louise, let's get some trees going on those spaces, right?
Yes. Yeah, grass, lawns. Whoever thought that was a good idea? Was it golfers?
No, it was weirder than that. It comes from the British estate tradition where big lawns were a status symbol that meant you could afford them. You could afford the help and you could afford the space. And they, the bigger the lawn, the richer you are. So they were imported in that way. Thorsten Veblen, who's an economist who was writing in the 1920s, wrote a whole bunch of essays about lawn as wealth and power symbols. And of course, nobody wanted to hear about it, but it's actually true. And you know, most lawns are a monoculture. If you're going to have lawn, at least do kind of one of those lawns that's got a big mix of wonderful flowers and things in it, like a fleur-de-lawn or eco mix. And you can get low growing grass mixtures that will also contain things like some clovers for nitrogen fixing and some veronicas for the bees. They're not barefoot territory, of course. If you have flowering plants in them, it's not where you want to run. But they're great if you're just using a lawn for your dog to have a little stretch and a place to relax, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea. But I love the idea of more trees, like,
Yeah, me too.
especially in a lot of the newer neighborhoods that are going in right here in downtown.
Yeah.
They stripped all the trees and boy.
And it's really kind of heartbreaking because when you take down big mature trees, and even if you put up a dozen little popsicle sticks trees, it takes years for them to mature and they will never, ever approach the volume of oxygen creation or food and shelter for wildlife and other things too. They actually do a huge amount of carbon drawdown, pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and pulling it all the way through their roots. They're now, I just read an article not long ago saying that researchers have found that some of the storage in tree roots, carbon is placed so deep they didn't even know it was there before. And they're just realizing how deeply it's planted. And that means it's much more lastingly locked up in the soil.
Yes.
So big trees, if you can find a place, and that's working with parks is kind of a good thing to do because they often have space and are willing to have memorial trees, for instance, and you can pick up big one, put in a chestnut.
Right. Instead of a memorial bench.
Sorry?
Instead of a memorial bench, put a memorial tree in.
Yeah.
I love that idea, Ann.
You know, and then make sure that it gets cared for. One
Right.
great way to do that is to take a milk jug, or my daughter uses 2.5 gallon distilled water containers for her CPAP machine. And so I take those and they have a little drip thing at the end. You screw in the top and it can be flipped open to pour or just drip. And we're doing that at the senior center with this beautiful little tree in the back that was only transplanted a year ago. So it needs some help. And that we fill it with 2.5 gallons and put it on drip, and it just slowly delivers, and it's making a big difference.
Gosh, I just noticed it's already our hour is up.
There you go.
Oh my gosh, does anybody else have a final question for Ann or comment? Joan, can you unmute yourself?
But I just want to say thank you very much. This has been most enlightening for me.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
Thank you, Ann.
And don't forget that in the last Tuesday of every month from 10 to 12, we're going to do in-person gardening at the senior center. And you can also just come and watch and bring your questions and sit under the umbrellas. And it doesn't have to be super hands-on if you want to just have a conversation.